Welcome to Discovering the Wellness Formula. I'm Ashley Glantz.
And I'm Dustin Messick, and we are both registered dietitian nutritionists. We're here to promote wellness through the lens of nutrition and so much more, helping you navigate the journey by bridging the gap between reliable information and misinformation.
Together, we'll provide you with a clear blueprint of knowledge and actionable steps to support your health and well-being.
And here's our disclaimer. The information provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or health concerns.
Our podcast, Discovering the Wellness Formula, dives into all domains of health, whether it's discussing mental health strategies, nutrition tips, fitness approaches, or exploring how relationships and personal growth contribute to our overall well-being. We aim to make wellness more accessible and inclusive for everyone. Welcome back to Discovering the Wellness Formula. Today, we are looking at wellness through the lens of eating disorder recovery and body image. With 91% of women reporting dissatisfaction with their bodies, this episode is a timely reminder that we deserve a different narrative, one rooted in acceptance, community, and self-trust. Whether you're navigating recovery, supporting someone who is, or simply curious about creating a more body-inclusive world, this episode is for you.
Michaela Williams, also known as Mickey, is a Los Angeles-based recovery coach and eating disorder specialist whose own healing journey inspired her to help others find freedom and self-trust. At 18, she launched Body, Love, and Beyond, a community platform that's since evolved into a virtual coaching practice, offering personalized, flexible support for individuals at all stages of recovery. With a master's in public administration and healthcare and years of experience at eating disorder treatment centers, where she served as a program manager, Mickey blends clinical insight with lived experience to provide compassionate care and advocate for a more body-inclusive world. Welcome to our podcast, Mickey.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad you were able to join us today for this special episode. So for our listeners who don't know what is a recovery coach, what inspired you to become an eating disorder recovery coach?
Well, a recovery coach at its core is an advocate and guide through the recovery process. Logistically, I provide meal support, mindfulness intervention, diet culture and body image psychoeducation, benchmarks of progress, tangible challenges and goals centered around recovery, and much more. My reasoning and inspiration for such is that at one point I was a client myself, and having crossed over into the corporate side of eating disorder care as well, I noticed some of the pitfalls and gaps in care and said to myself, there are glaring issues that can be fixed. One being accessibility and another being flexibility. So those are two of the primary things that recovery coaching can provide that some traditional eating disorder treatment programs cannot.
Amazing, Mickey. We, again, are so happy to have you and have just a beautiful conversation today. I didn't learn about what a recovery coach was until I personally was working in treatment. So if you could kind of just give us a little day in the life when you are working with clients.
A day in the life, yeah. It really kind of depends on where the client is at. And as my experience crosses over multiple diagnoses, it's also taking into account their history and, if they've been in treatment before. My first order of business is to kind of assess and meet the client where they're at. So coming up with some tangible goals. A lot of recovery is, a lot of the mental progress and philosophy and those kinds of things that can't always be measured. But a lot of the things that we can measure are, goals with food and exposures and things that might require a bit more support. So things like meal support, or sometimes we do a lot of like shadow work or things to address parts of self that are becoming roadblocks to the recovery process. So individualized on, that initial intake where I'll kind of get a gauge of where the client is at and what we can, make happen that feels like tangible goals, but also then push ourselves a little bit so that we can start seeing those results and feeling like we're making progress that can, encourage the recovery process.
That is so beautiful. And we really appreciate you sharing your vulnerability and just sharing that you too are recovered. So I imagine that is such an incredible connection that you have with your clients, being recovered yourself, but also being able to show up for them and with them in this virtual coaching setting. How do you feel like your personal experience has shaped the way that you support your clients in their healing?
I believe it shapes everything that I do, really, and my philosophy around not only my coaching, but life. I feel like compassion is the forefront of any care, and it's the difference between talking at somebody and working with somebody, really seeing them as a whole person and giving them that irrefutable evidence that recovery is possible. For a lot of people, that whether you're just starting in your recovery journey or you've been at it for a while and hitting roadblock after roadblock, it is incredibly inspiring to be able to know that there is a different option, there's a different life, there's a different mentality and way of living that's accessible. It feels like an impossibility when it's something that it's either been so long that you've forgotten what that's even like, or maybe you've never even experienced it before. My recovery journey has been, a long and arduous one in my own right. And now to be able to stand as that pillar of recovery for other people and model that that is something attainable really does shape every aspect of the way that I approach client care.
What do you wish more people understood about the recovery process?
I wish that more people understood recovery can be very anticlimactic. You hear all the time that recovery is not linear, which is very true. But what you don't hear as often is that recovery sometimes does not come with trumpets and a big banner and parade. It's very subtle. It's a lot of seemingly impossible decisions made every day over and over and over again. And you oftentimes don't know when you've sort of turned that new leaf or that flip has switched. It's an accumulation of those small everyday choices until you're, walking down the road for maybe 3-ish years or so. And one day you notice that this thing that used to be impossible for you just doesn't scare you anymore. It sometimes happens unceremoniously. It takes a lot of blind faith in the recovery process, which especially in the beginning, it feels like the magnitude of those impossible decisions really outweigh any positive future that recovery could entail. But though it doesn't come, with a big banner or definite exclamation of "I am recovered," it is kind of the small amalgamation of choices that amount to a recovered life.
Yeah, it sounds almost like it's not one of those breakthroughs, like, those Tony Robbins breakthroughs where you're like, like I just, this new opening happened and I just felt this super elevated state and I just was floating on a cloud. It sounds more of it's like that mundane consistency, doing some of those boring tasks repetitively until eventually you're in a great place where you feel more secure, more safe in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard in a way that makes it even more difficult because there's no, for some people, maybe there is, but in my experience and in the experience that I've seen with other clients, it's usually not like one big aha moment. It's more of these tiny choices and these tiny moments where for the beginning, a lot of the time you don't even have a strong personal conviction in the why. I always tell clients, when you don't know what choice to make, ask yourself, what is the recovery choice? And usually even the logical brain has an idea of what would be the recovery choice. And even if you don't know at the time why you're making it, just make the recovery choice and make the recovery choice every single time, as many times as you possibly can. and until you sort of retrain the muscle to default to the recovery choice. And over time, it becomes almost more natural to make that choice than the latter.
I used to say all the time, do you feel like this is bringing you closer to recovery or further away?
Mm-hmm.
And they would be like, why'd you have to ask me that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that as well, because I think a lot of people, when you think about recovery, it can sound really scary, or it can sound like a really big mountain to climb. And to break it down into smaller pieces like that, just taking it a day at a time, a moment at a time, can make it feel a lot more approachable for people. I think that's really, really important. When thinking about recovery, there's so many different recovery philosophies out there, so many different treatment centers, etc. But how would you really define recovery, and what does that look like to you in everyday life?
That's a great question. I think in my experience, as far as like the industry of recovery and different treatment centers, generally the philosophy that I come across the most often is the idea of being fully recovered, which I too 100% believe in. The only caveat I would add to that, I suppose, of tiny nuance, is that you can be fully recovered. However, it's never erased from your story. It's always something that, guides and influences your life. And it's something that you'll have to kind of, at times, stand in solidarity with as this society and our culture continues with, more ostracizing body image mentalities and diet culture philosophies and all kinds of things that are not conducive to the recovery mindset. You will sometimes have to stand alone in that, but that's why it's so important to keep fine-tuning that every single day. And it also, at least in my experience, when you get to that point where you can confidently say, I am recovered, it's never as hard as it was. Like I said, those impossible tiny choices that you made over and over and over again, they do get easier. They do, the pressure of it lessens. And I think recovery and what it looks like in everyday life is kind of a promise to self every single day. And it's just renewing and maintaining that promise to self that you will stand in solidarity with your recovery mindset, and you will encourage it and nurture it in your everyday life.
What role does body image work play in recovery? And how do you help support your clients in this area?
Body image is, I sort of like to think of it as the final boss of recovery. For some reason, and it was the same way for me as well, I had sort of stabilized my metabolism, my nutritional needs. I had stopped engaging in behaviors. I had managed things with my family and had those sessions and had those big soul searching moments. And then it came to body image, and it was this just immovable beast. And it felt so superfluous at the end of it all. Like, I know this doesn't matter. I know it's superficial, but I just can't move past it. And that's what I hear from a lot of clients as well, is that they almost feel guilty that they're still struggling with body image at the end of their recovery journey and throughout. But the thing about body image is that it's usually, especially in an eating disorder context, it's very often tied to what someone's eating disorder, what their ideal was. You can do a lot of that internal work, but letting go of how you are perceived by other people, letting go of that external part is really, really difficult, because you have to relinquish what other people think of you. And social media does not help in that regard. I think we would be remiss not to acknowledge how much social media does affect our view of body image. Social media is often usually the champion of what is acceptable. And a lot of the times you'll see body positivity packaged, repackaged, and repurposed, where it's not really body positive or body neutral, but rather just the same trend brought about in a different way. So we really have to be constantly questioning what we're receiving on a marketing end and the messages that we're being told. And especially as women, body image is a very gendered subject a lot of the time. So acknowledging how those societal expectations push against that recovery mindset, So I often, for clients, I advise curating your feed to the best of your ability to be as body inclusive as possible, making sure if there's accounts or things like that that are making you feel like you are in constant need of changing your body, that you unfollow those accounts and, curate your feed to be more inclusive, and constantly redefining what is an acceptable, air quotes, body for yourself, and not letting social media and diet culture write that definition for you.
That's fair. Yeah. And there's also this weird thing in treatment where we're telling our clients it's all about body positivity. And to some of the clients I worked with, that sounds very woo woo. And even body neutrality, we would have like a body neutrality worksheet we'd have them do. And they'd write all the things down and they would all just be like, bleh, who cares if my legs can walk me down the hallway? And then we were kind of like presented with this thing called body tolerance, because some people feel dysregulated by feeling their body. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or ideas of how this might intersect with some of the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. These are some of my favorite topics to talk about because they're very community based. Even the body positivity movement began around like the 60s or so and was mostly for people of color and disabled individuals. And it has really transformed and kind of experienced its own sort of renaissance, I think, in the last like decade or so. And with that has been a rather glorious explosion of body acceptance, but also, once again, kind of with the conversation about social media, it's been rebranded and filtered and, packaged to fit kind of an agenda of an advertising world. And with it, I will see a lot of the time the same sort of like a dieting agenda or an obsessive exercise agenda packaged as body positivity in social media and other spheres. And it's difficult because our society really condones it a lot of the time. We'll call something, quote, healthy that is really catering more to an extremism mindset. The thing about body positivity in general is that it's really hard to go from the extremism of I hate my body, I'm so dissatisfied with my body, to my body is God's gift to the earth. It's very difficult to sort of ping pong between both those extremes. And so we offer body neutrality as that sort of middle ground. But even then, body neutrality feels unattainable when you've been stuck in such a negative headspace with the body. So I do make a concentrated effort myself to love my body and accept it. But most days, what body neutrality really means to me and what I understand it to be is that I'm not really thinking about my body too hard. I have respect for it. I acknowledge it and I appreciate it. I take care of it, but it doesn't occupy a lot of space in my day-to-day life. And that to me is also a testament to recovery, because I do remember a point where my body and how it looked occupied every waking thought. And I know a lot of people that are in the throngs of their eating disorder or just even struggling with their body image feel that way, where they're very constantly conscious of the way that their body looks and the way that other people perceive them and what category their body will fit into. Body neutrality is reaching that place where you can acknowledge and accept it, but it's not the most important part of your day. Most days I'm fairly neutral toward it. I'm thankful for it. I can have that respect for it, but it's not my parameter for whether I am worthy of love, whether I am worthy of fun experiences. And that to me is more attainable and sustainable, really, than a constant body positivity mindset. I think body positivity is essential for marginalized groups as far as like deconstructing that extremism that we see in our culture. But what I would, suggest to my clients is body neutrality mindset, because it allows you to have that sort of wiggle room to have days where maybe it's a little bit harder to be neutral, other days where you feel really positive, but also reaching that place where your body is not the most interesting thing about you.
Yeah, there's a couple things I really appreciate about that portion of the conversation. Number one, that body image is really the last piece for a lot of us of the recovery puzzle. It's something that a lot of us can struggle with for a long time throughout recovery, and really knowing that it is us taking that active role in our own lives to work towards it every single day. I also really appreciate you kind of describing body image as a spectrum. So maybe we have dissatisfaction over here and body positivity over here, and somewhere in the middle we have neutrality. And so thinking about that body neutrality piece that you mentioned that you like to work towards with your clients, what are some maybe tangible steps or tools just for our listeners to kind of get some takeaways on how maybe they could step towards body neutrality for themselves?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of some of the suggestions are things that obviously at the forefront, someone who's really struggling with their body image does not want to hear, but are so helpful in tackling, those areas of conscious where we just exist in that shame. I honestly, it might sound weird, but I will sit with a journal and I will stare at myself in the mirror for a little bit. And I will try my absolute hardest to just take note of things with an observant mindset, not casting judgment, not falling into any categories necessarily, just taking an inventory of what I see, noticing it. I think a lot of time that avoidance to even look ourselves in the eye, whether metaphorically or literally, it makes us susceptible to that fear of somebody else catching something before we do. If we're avoiding these big words, I oftentimes do a little bit of wordplay also. I've done different gigs and speaking things, even at conventions and whatnot, where I will start the conversation with an audience interaction of defining fat and thin. Those are very loaded words. They have a lot of cultural connotations. So I'll ask people to kind of, tell me, what does that mean? What did those words bring up? And a lot of times the connotation with fat is undesirable, unlikable, not wanted, unhealthy, all these stipulations that are bottled up just in that one singular word. And then in thin also, people have said things like lovable, likable, admirable, money, wealth, popularity. So these words don't exist just by themselves. So with that word association, what you end up piecing together is that a lot of our definitions were not written by us. They were written by our culture or society about the way that we think we are being perceived by other people. To reach body neutrality, I always suggest, first and foremost, unpackaging those definitions and unpackaging the connotations that they bring and acknowledging them, acknowledging the way that what it would mean to be labeled as fat to you or thin, and what those labels and boxes, say about you. Acknowledging those loaded words sort of takes the fear and shame away from them, as well as really getting to know yourself. Those maybe, if somebody's avoiding a certain part of their body that is something that they're just constantly self-conscious with, I invite them to sit with it and sit in that discomfort and just take note of everything and anything that comes up, and we can talk about it afterwards. But just removing the shame and the hiding from those things and bringing them to the light, because so often that's what those parts of us really crave, is to be acknowledged. It really lessens and dampens that sort of intrinsic fear that we feel about other people seeing it too, that there's shame in being perceived a certain way. So my main advice for reaching that place of body neutrality is unpackaging how and why those words and labels define us and what they actually mean to us.
I think that's beautiful, because taking away the stigma gives us back that power, right?
Yeah.
Being able to externalize those words and realize we don't need to take ownership of those. Those are external words and we don't necessarily need to internalize them. You also mentioned earlier an amazing tool would be to kind of more curate your social media. I imagine that can help us with just the body neutrality, because we're less comparison. You mentioned journal work, mirror work, observing ourselves without judgment. I used to always work with clients as well on reflecting on different ways we can respect our bodies, with nourishing our bodies or resting or whatever that looks like, but also practicing eventually a little bit of gratitude in there just for the physical things that our bodies are able to do for us. So I think those are all incredible tools and takeaways for our listeners. How do you feel like self-compassion plays into your work with your clients, whether it be them giving themselves self-compassion or you helping them get to that self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, one of the most essential parts of any recovery work, whether you are the one, whether you're the coach or the client, it's part of mastery of self, because we're going to make mistakes. And as we have heard before, recovery is not linear. And it's important also to practice what you preach. I truly believe that, my own mind and body connection can sense when I'm dissonant, can sense when I'm not being genuine in what I'm sharing. So I also have to hold myself accountable for making sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching, that I am being self-compassionate and I am doing my own work. And also reminding clients that it is not a one and done. It is not always something that we can measure. It's something that we want to be able to, and you probably can in more ways than you realize. But that self-compassion piece is an act of self-love. It's a radical act of self-love. So, and that's the core of a lot of recovery. But a lot of recovery is not just blindly, loving every aspect. It's also acknowledging the hard parts. It's taking accountability. It's, you might run into an area of life or a shadow of self that you're not necessarily proud of. And it's important to acknowledge it with kind of human perspective. We've made these choices and we can change that in the future and we can work towards recovery, but it's going to take a lot of self-forgiveness over and over and over again.
Wow, I just had maybe an aha moment from listening to you share that, Mickey. I was just thinking about how it sounds like there's like this like process that you're going through with self-compassion, almost like there's like an action happening, like rather than just like one day waking up and looking in the mirror and being like, wow, I love myself. My body is amazing. It's like this like ongoing like work that's just like continuously happening. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds counterproductive, but honestly, sometimes self-compassion is not just those moments of like, wow, I love myself and I'm doing so great. Self-compassion can be, you know what? I don't feel great right now. I don't feel great about myself. I have a lot of work to do. And knowing that that's okay. Being honest with self is a measure of self-compassion, in that it doesn't have to be wrapped up with a bow by the end of the day. A lot of the time it won't be. And that self-compassion to me is honesty and transparency and making room for that, because that's where we're vulnerable, and vulnerable is where change happens. So we have to make that space where we can be self-compassionate and we can acknowledge that maybe we're not where we want to be, and that's okay.
That's very profound. I love that whenever anyone is, or myself, is feeling bad and someone just says, oh, it's okay. It's kind of that saying of okay. It's like almost like a sense of an acceptance towards your current situation. But that acceptance makes your situation better than like earlier you were talking about like avoidance, like resisting.
Yeah. A lot of people will confuse it with a sense of like complacency. Like, okay, if I got to fix it, I got to fix it right away. Like, of course you don't want to stay stuck in one spot, but also part of a lot of the time you can't move forward without acknowledging. If you feel a deep-seated sadness or some wall that's coming up, it's very natural to feel frustration in that, to feel, maybe even angry at yourself and redirecting that frustration onto self. But a lot of the time that self-compassion work is just acknowledging and holding space for that roadblock and knowing that it's not going to stay that way forever. Acknowledging it does not mean that you're being complacent in it and saying like, okay, we're just going to not do anything about it then. Like, it really does sometimes just take acknowledging that part of you to let your mind and body connection know that you're listening, know that you're actively trying to check in and be honest about where you're at. And it encourages a better form of trust later on when you're trying to push through those walls.
Yeah, and this actually is a great transitional point to my next question, which is, what's your approach when a client is feeling stuck in the recovery journey?
Yeah, that's a big one. I think that is kind of an inevitable part. I've been hard pressed to find, I can't really even think of any example with any client or myself or my experience where someone doesn't get stuck at some point. And one of the ways that I found that is effective to sort of come out of that, I invite them to take a step back and mark their progress up until now. It's easy to fall into the trap of feeling like this is completely stagnant and it will never change. But this is also why I encourage clients to keep a constant log and a written discourse of their headspace throughout the recovery process, because you will be floored by how much progress you can make in a short amount of time. When you're at that stuck point, it may be an area where past you never would have dreamed you'd reach. The place that you're at right now that is the end all be all and is your greatest frustration is a place that a version of you would have only dreamed you were at. There's progress in those little pieces. So I always encourage as much as possible to, if you're starting at the beginning or starting now, doesn't matter when, just taking those inventories and doing those small check-ins and writing things down. For some people, that's not their favorite thing. I do voice memos sometimes if I have little moments or thoughts or something like that. Just taking an inventory constantly and then reviewing that back. It can sometimes be really motivating. It's hard to see and keep that perspective when we feel like we're stuck. It means that we're probably losing a little bit of perspective. It's very natural to get stuck. But like I said, you'd be surprised to see how far you've come in a short amount of time. If you're looking towards this impossible end goal, it's helpful to see how far you've come up until now and knowing that you're not going to stay here forever. We're looking at the end goal, the end post, and thinking that we're not there, then we're failing, without acknowledging all the little successes that we've had up until then. And that also is part of it leads us back to that narrative of recovery not being this big moment or one particular, light switch. It is a lot of tiny things. And sometimes we can't really see all those tiny things that we've done already. I think it is really important that we have good support systems also that can remind us in times like that when we're stuck of how far we've come, and also to keep our own perspectives in check and know that this is not the end of the road. We've done a lot of little things to get here and we'll continue to do a lot of little things to move forward.
I think there's so much value in reflecting on the progress, like you said, and making sure that we have an adequate support system. Especially, I imagine it's hard to really lose sight of the progress, like you were saying, because we are taking such small steps towards recovery. And a lot of times it's hard for us to realize how far along we have come in our journey. And I really loved the line that you said, stuck equals a loss in perspective. That is such a great line, just to remind ourselves when we're feeling stuck, we might just be losing perspective in that moment. And that can be a really great time to pause, reflect on the progress, and really notice how far we really have come.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we think about recovery, you mentioned it's not linear. It can be a long road for some of us, and thinking for someone that might be in the earlier stages of recovery, maybe they're not seeing a outpatient recovery coach yet, such as yourself. Maybe they're just getting ready to kind of pick up the phone and decide to seek recovery. What is one message that you would have for someone that is in early stages or seeking recovery?
Wow. I mean, there's so many little things, and this feels like a line, but it really isn't. It's that recovery is worth it. And people hear that and they kind of roll their eyes like it's just, like I said, a line. But what I mean is that no, actually, it really is worth it. I have never once, not once, missed my eating disorder. I've never dreamt of the life that I used to have with it. Every aspect of my life improved without the eating disorder. And I can say that with 100% confidence. It actually is worth it. To the cynic that's sitting there and thinking like, I don't know if at the end of this, I can really say that it was worth all this trouble, worth all this pain and hardship. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. My life is so much more colorful. My relationships are so much more sincere. Every aspect of my interests and of my dreams and aspirations have expanded into something I never could have imagined. And We talked a lot about the lack of aha moments. There was one in particular for me not too long ago. It was when I was working in residential, and I was there on Thanksgiving Day, which, as you can imagine, is a difficult holiday for people that are struggling with body image, struggling with eating disorders. I was sharing and talking with one of my coworkers who was also recovered, and we were eating our Thanksgiving meal and sharing with the clients and talking with everybody. And we just looked at each other. I said, "It is absolutely worth it, isn't it? All of this was so worth it." And we both had this kind of just smiling and nodding quiet moment where we were enjoying our Thanksgiving dinner while we were working in eating disorder recovery, helping the clients also work through those areas. And I remember how many difficult, impossible Thanksgivings I'd had up until then, and how many little impossible moments, and like I said, impossible choices there were, and how small they feel now, how easy it is for me now to make the recovery choice, because I 100% believe, I know that recovery is worth it. It actually is really, really worth it.
I love hearing that. I actually was working with a client recently, and they were talking about when they're so distracted that the eating disorder can't really be present, and they're able to just enjoy food like it's just food, right? They feel so happy. And when the eating disorder voice kind of comes back, that's when they're like, oh man. So I love hearing that, and I'm hoping that the people that are listening are like, wow, there's hope. What would you like people to take away from this conversation?
I would like people to know that there are resources and that we are constantly evolving in our approach to eating disorder care, and that whether you are suffering from an eating disorder or you are battling your own body image, that there is a better way, there's a better life to be had. The more that the eating disorder quiets, the more your life becomes loud and colorful, really and truly. And I think that one of the biggest paradoxes of recovery is that the eating disorder will constantly, push the narrative that you can't be in control or you will lose control, whether it's of weight or food or things like that. So much of it is relinquishing control to the eating disorder. And it feels like one step forward, two steps back a lot of the time. That sometimes it doesn't come with a loud exclamation, but it will also feel at times like you are losing control. You were losing that piece of you that made sense, but that there is more life to live, and there is so much outside of the eating disorder, and that the real control, the real initiative in life is stepping away from the eating disorder and finding your own clarity in body image and with your body and with your mind. Recovery is a long and arduous process, but as we said before, it is so, so worth it. And there are a lot of people out there willing to help. You don't have to stand. It oftentimes feel like you will be standing in solidarity, but there are others that are standing right beside you that you may not even be able to see. But we are here, we are listening, and we will support.
That is so beautiful, Mickey. We are so grateful for your time today and just taking time to share your story, your honesty, your experiences. And thank you for all of our listeners for tuning in to this powerful conversation with Mickey today. Her story is a real reminder that recovery isn't about perfection. It's about progress, presence, and learning to trust our own bodies again. Healing is possible, and you don't have to do it alone. To learn more about Mickey's work or connect with her, check out the links in our show notes. Until next time, take care, and remember, wellness isn't one size fits all. It's personal, evolving, and always within reach. Our podcast, Discovering the Wellness Formula, dives into all domains of health. Whether it's discussing mental health strategies, nutrition tips, fitness approaches, or exploring how relationships and personal growth contribute to our overall well-being, We aim to make wellness more accessible and inclusive for everyone.